Margaret was 76, living in a small coastal town, with only her dog Jasper to keep her company. To strangers, she was the typical widow-like figure, quiet, graceful, and reclusive. But Margaret's husband, George, was still alive, just not present. He had moved to another city years ago for work, but Margaret knew the truth: he lived with another woman now, a much younger one. What no one knew was that Margaret had once committed a betrayal of her own, years before George's affair. It was brief, a passionate few weeks with an old friend named Richard, a man who truly listened to her, who once picked flowers from her garden and made her feel seen. But Margaret ended it, overcome with guilt. She kept that chapter locked away, punishing herself silently until George's affair came to light. She never confronted him. Instead, she welcomed Jasper into her life. Jasper wasn't just a dog. He slept in George's old place in the bed. She spoke to him every day like a child. She even told him things she never confessed to anyone. He became a living diary, absorbing her pain, her longing, and her guilt. Neighbors whispered about how strange it was, how she never traveled, how she skipped family dinners, how everything revolved around Jasper. One day, George showed up unexpectedly, older, frailer, maybe even regretful. He asked to see Jasper. Margaret didn't even blink before saying no. "He's mine," she said, with a fierceness that surprised even herself. They sat awkwardly, and for the first time she spoke of Richard. "You weren't the only one who strayed, George," she whispered. His eyes widened. "But I came back," she added. "You didn't." George left without saying goodbye. That night, Jasper fell ill. Margaret sat by his side for hours, stroking his fur, whispering things like prayers. As dawn broke, she felt something shift inside her, a release. She cried, not just for her dog, but for everything she had locked away. Jasper passed peacefully. Emotional substitution is at the heart of Margaret's strange bond with her dog. After decades of feeling emotionally neglected by her husband George, who had become increasingly distant and cold, Margaret found herself aching for connection. When George ultimately left her emotionally, if not legally, for another woman, it was not just betrayal. It was the final confirmation that she was no longer wanted. Instead of confronting the pain directly, Margaret redirected all the love, attention, and emotional energy she once gave to her. The hidden truths of Margaret's life were tangled with years of unspoken regrets, and they only became more complex as time went on. While George's infidelity had been an open wound, Margaret harbored a secret of her own, one that she'd buried so deeply that even she had forgotten its full weight until the moment it resurfaced. Decades earlier, when her marriage was still young and filled with the false promise of eternal devotion, Margaret had had an affair with Richard, an old friend who came back into her life during a particularly lonely time. The affair was passionate, raw, and filled with the attention Margaret had craved from George for so long. But the guilt overwhelmed her. She ended it, pushing Richard away, not just because she loved George, but because she couldn't bear the idea of losing the life they had built together. This secret became a silent specter that haunted her marriage, though George was oblivious to it. When George's own affair came to light, Margaret felt a strange mixture of vindication and sorrow. Her heart was torn between the emotions she had buried deep and the new, raw betrayal she faced. Rather than confronting George about his affair, she held on to the memory of her own betrayal and, in some way, used it as a shield. She couldn't expose him because, in her mind, she had no right to call him out. The shame of her affair locked her into a cycle of secrecy, making her feel like a silent accomplice to his own dishonesty. In that way, the weight of her past infidelity subtly mirrored the emotional distance growing between her and George. Loneliness and denial became the driving forces behind Margaret's attachment to Jasper, her dog, in ways she had never fully understood. After years of living in a marriage that had lost its emotional depth, Margaret's sense of self was fractured. The emotional distance created by George's absence, physically and emotionally, left a deep, aching void. The house was filled with memories of what once was, but now it echoed with silence. Margaret had no children of her own, and the family she had grown up with had drifted away. With no one else to confide in, she turned to Jasper, filling the space George had vacated. Jasper wasn't simply a pet, he became her closest confidant, and the only constant in her life. Every morning, she fed him, walked him, and spent hours simply sitting with him. Her conversations were no longer one-sided. She shared her frustrations, regrets, and fears, as if he could understand. In this deep attachment, there was an underlying denial of the truth that had been slowly unraveling around her. She refused to confront the pain of George's betrayal or her own failures. She filled the emptiness with affection for her dog, using him as a shield from the difficult emotions she had been avoiding. Her growing attachment to Jasper allowed her to avoid facing the harsh reality of her marriage's decline. She often justified her reliance on him by telling herself that she could trust Jasper more than she could trust anyone else. In her mind, it was easier to pour love into something that couldn't hurt her than to confront the emotional wreckage left by years of neglect and deceit.